As a person who ships characters regularly, when I watch a show, I didn't think twice about finding Angelo and Nero's relationship interesting. I just thought I found them to have chemistry and wanted to ship them because of it. But when I rewatched 91 Days recently for my open-ending video essay, I realized that the show blatantly features examples of gay subtext between Nero and Angelo, which are very similar to gay subtext seen in old Hollywood films. And as a result, this video was born. Now you might be wondering, what the hell is gay subtext, or more broadly known as queer subtext to include everyone in the LGBTQ+ community. Historically in film, homoerotic subtext is a method or a way of framing a relationship between two same-sex characters in a fictional story, whether it be film, animated show, etc. The specific framing of these characters where it doesn't outright say that they are queer or into each other or have a romantic relationship, but it insinuates it in other aspects, whether it be through intimacy or through visual cues, and often common stereotypical tropes. This also has to do with Motion Picture Production Code, or the Hays Code, which was, according to this archive's website, it states it would put in place a series of censorship guidelines by which the production of indecent or immoral filmic content would be restricted. The institution of the Hays Code heralded the end of the sissy and his more complex counterparts in popular cinema, and the beginning of more reserved queer characters whose true nature was necessarily buried by subtext and innuendo. Between 1930 and 1960, a span that encompassed Hollywood's golden age of film production, queer characters were either obscured through ambiguity or else written out entirely from Hollywood films. From my understanding, for relationships between two male characters in these films, oftentimes they use phallic symbols such as cigarettes, canes, and even guns, as seen in this example of Red River.
It's a good-looking gun you were about to use back there. Can I see it? Maybe you'd like to see mine. Nice, awful nice.
Go ahead, try it.
Hey, that's very good.
Even guns are somehow a phallic symbol. Now in 91 Days, there isn't any like guns comparison scenes, like where it's like clearly innuendo, but there are instances where cigarettes are very much used like commonly in this show. So because of these instances, I very much believe 91 Days does feature a lot of gay subtext. And in 91 Days, the story takes place in 1928, essentially right on the cusp of this film restriction, and it takes place in America, Illinois. And if there is any relationship between two characters of the same gender, it would be frowned upon and criminalized, very much so, at this time period in 1928. So any romance would likely be subtextual in this time period. And if characters are bisexual, gay, or any other non-straight identity, they would be heavily closeted or concealing their identity if they were members of the mafia, a deeply heterosexual, male-centered, organized crime circles. Now in the present day, gay subtext or homoerotic subtext has grown from an umbrella term into different categories that describe a method of framing queer characters or queer relationships between characters. As seen in this Tumblr post by these users that differentiate between queer baiting, queer coding, and queer subtext, there are different categories in media that describe queer relationships or queer characters that have developed over time from the simple homoerotic subtext that existed in the Hays Code era. Nowadays, there is queer coding and there is queer subtext. Now, queer coding is when they don't outright say they are like queer or in the LGBTQ+ community, but they have specific mannerisms or a way of expressing themselves, or the show frames them in a certain way that indicates they are queer without outright saying it. An example of this is Ursula from The Little Mermaid, in which she was based off of a drag queen. In the film The Little Mermaid, like, that isn't mentioned at all. Ursula is like a sea witch, right? But it is a fact that like the showrunners and the creators of her design based her upon a drag queen. Therefore, it is queer coding. They did that intentionally. Queer subtext nowadays would be they didn't realize that it would quite be that the audience could interpret it as queer, which is why it is called queer subtext nowadays. Back then, queer subtext kind of just was an umbrella term, but now that we have queer coding as a term, queer coding is where like like they know what they're doing, or like because of censorship and they want to sell the show to more countries, they cannot explicitly show a certain thing. So like Yuri on Ice, I think would be an example of that, where they couldn't explicitly show a kiss between Victor and Yuri, but they sort of went around it in terms of how they framed it so that I believe they could still sell it to multiple places. So like that was probably an instance of queer coding. Queer coding is that as an example, which I've learned from this Tumblr post that I'll put on the screen here by Safi Watches You Sleep. That user, they explained example of Gravity Falls where the police officers were a gay couple, but they couldn't explicitly show it until like the last episode. And then queer subtext would be when they didn't realize that to the audience that this could be seen as a little bit gay. That is gay subtext, which is what I will be arguing for this video, simply due to the fact that I have no definitive proof or sources to go off of. I don't know what the writers or hell even the animators were thinking when they were deliberately framing like Nero and Angelo's relationship in this way. I don't know if they intentionally did this or not. So because of that, I'm just going to be describing this as gay subtext rather than queer coding or anything like that. I'll just call it queer subtext or gay subtext specifically because I'll be talking about Angelo and Nero, who are two men. So like gay subtext in the case for this, because I have no definitive proof that they intentionally meant for Nero and Angelo's relationship to be read as romantic. But that is how I've interpreted it, and I'm going to be going over specific examples in this show. The video will be broken up into these key parts. I will first go over key examples of gay subtext, then I will go over how the show features an inherently romantic trope or a portion of it. Let's start off by going over the key examples of gay subtext between Angelo and Nero. As I mentioned earlier, during the Hays Code era, cigarettes were used as a symbol of intimacy between two men when they cannot explicitly state or express their intimacy to one another. So they would use cigarettes as like a form of showing affection or physical intimacy between two same-sex characters on screen during the Hays Code era. In this case, Angelo and Nero do have instances where cigarettes can be seen as a symbol of gay subtext between the two of them. In episode 5, Nero asks if Angelo still wants to be a part of a mafia family, and he hands Angelo a cigarette he just used, and Angelo takes it to smoke it. Nero smiles afterwards and steps on the gas. The sharing a cigarette or sharing a light trope is common in old censored Hollywood films and is blatant queer romantic subtext. There is undeniable possible romance which has developed over the course of the two traveling together for weeks to avoid conflict back in Lawless. And this is confirmed in this short, very simple scene of Nero offering a cigarette to Angelo and Angelo smoking it afterwards. Like there's a clear affection between the two of them in this scene, and the fact that they literally share a cigarette to me indicates that it is an instance of a gay subtext. The second instance this occurs is in episode 12, the final episode, but it's not as intentional in terms of sharing a cigarette. Instead, in this scene, Nero gives Angelo a pack of cigarettes, despite the fact Angelo has literally just killed or destroyed the entire Benetti family, basically, and he still gives him a pack of cigarettes, showing that there is still an affection or an attraction between them that is still evident and is not diminished over time. It's almost extending an olive branch between them to show that Nero still has some care for him, and he isn't going to treat him terrible enough that he can't even smoke on this journey, even though I believe he's still tied up in this moment, and Nero unties him at some point, so the animosity between them basically fades away over the course of them driving miles and miles around together for many days and nights. Also during this scene, Nero kind of makes a sound of amusement when Angelo smokes a cigarette. There is a similar past affection that is still up in the air. These two are the most fragmented characters and they should hate each other, and yet they still stay together. They gravitate to each other despite what occurs between them, and they keep basically coming back to one another is what I'm trying to say. Now, not only are cigarettes a key indicator of gay subtext, another part of gay subtext I believe that is more commonly known in today's day that a lot of modern day viewers interpret as gay subtext that perhaps showrunners don't realize can be interpreted as gay subtext, but that is the trope of the long staring and prolonged looks between characters, or one character staring a long time at another character without the other character realizing it. To me, those are subtextually romantic gestures in terms of like staring a long time right in the eye of another person. That is very inherently romantic. You don't usually stare straight ahead at someone that often, so there's a reason why it's an inherently romantic trope in media. It's because it produces intimacy and affection without explicitly having a kiss scene or anything like outwardly romantic, such as a kiss scene or like a sex scene. You could show intimacy and romance by prolonged looks and stares. So in episode 3, after escaping the villain, Nero stops in a crowd and just stares back at Avilio. This could be seen as suspicion, but the tension is palpable between them. Also, it is fairly common trope, the whole staring at one another across a crowd or looking back at the person you like before you continue leaving. Also in episode 3, later on, when Avilio offers to keep Nero company on a trip getting out of town, like basically running away from Lawless because people are going after Nero. Throughout the whole scene, Nero and Avilio are staring at each other while Barbaro and Frate look between them. They're caught up in each other and sort of having this stare down between them while other people are there, which I find that as like a tiny little moment where it could be seen as a prolonged look or stare, but it's very short, so it could also be interpreted as a very simple, like regular stare. At this point, Avilio, I do not think, has developed romantic interest in Nero. He's still on his mission to like get rid of Nero, everyone who is involved in the death of his family. So at this point, there is clear animosity still from Angelo's side, but Nero, there could be seen an interest in Nero's eyes, or like a spark that he sees in Angelo that he is interested in uncovering or like getting to know Angelo or getting to know more about him. So like that's the vibe this scene gives me. In episode 8, Angelo agrees to Nero and supports him. Nero is at his limit. He has very dark under eye circles. He's super freaking tired. This is all after he has killed his brother, and he still trusts Angelo. And they basically have this whole moment where mirroring one another from across a lawn, but they're very much staring at each other, and Nero like sort of gets up and looks at him and asks if like Angelo's still with them on this and supporting him, and Angelo agrees to still supporting Nero. Episode 8 is also the beginning of, I believe, Corteo's worries and kind of could be interpreted as jealousy of Nero and Angelo's relationship, in which he gets very anxious and worried that Angelo is going to be unable to kill Nero because of how they're getting so much closer together. And he keeps on watching Angelo and Nero when they have like a meeting together, so he was eavesdropping or looking at them and is starting to distrust the closeness that is developing between the two of them. So that is also of note in this specific time period.
For the record, I saved your bacon more than once out there.
Run your mouth after you've reimbursed me for the damage to my car.
And the next episode, episode 9, is the part where Angelo like officially, I think, becomes a member of the family. They have a whole ceremony where Nero becomes the Don. The ceremony where they kiss the back of a hand of the Don, which is like a sign of respect and support of being a part of the Benetti family. But Angelo's kiss to Nero, like the back of Nero's hand, is a little different than everyone else's. Angelo sort of like, it shows his eyes looking up after the kiss to the hand, and so his kiss just looks different than the others' kisses who had just kissed Nero's hand. And also for Angelo's case, it shows Nero's face after Angelo kisses his hand, so it feels like a purposeful choice to show Nero's reaction to the kiss. At least personally, it shows an indication of a tension between them where Nero is a little bit more aware of Angelo's action than perhaps Angelo even realizes. So that's how I interpreted the scene, where Nero is either like a little shocked or like noticing that he didn't mind the kiss, and or like he may have liked the kiss. There was a clear choice of the fact that the animators lingered on Angelo's eyes and it was different than everyone else's kisses. You could say that it's because he's a main character, but I would say it's an indicator of their developing relationship over the course of the show. In episode 12, and this scene is so intense, like it creates tension without even showing the two of them in the same frame. It shows them in the same frame for a brief moment, but it's a far away shot where it's like a bird's eye view shot, sort of like an upper shot, and then it cuts to Nero's face, extreme anger, and he's so livid. He's like, this extreme tension in the room between them, but he's like so pissed off at Angelo in realizing what exactly he has allowed to fester in his family. He's allowed basically a mole to come close to his family, destroy it from the inside, and he's so livid and angry, and it's a cut shot of just showing Nero's face after that, and then it cuts to Angelo's face, and he's looking out the window. He's not even looking at Nero. Nero's like glaring at him like this, and he slowly turns his head, and he just smirks at him. There's no statements, there's no talking between them. All Angelo really does is he just turns his head slowly and gives like this look, this very amused expression, this very like, ha, I've got you, you've basically fallen into my like web, my entire trap. That's like the persona Angelo is presenting to Nero. In this scene, he's like presenting the ideal like villainous figure. The reality is that Angelo is very much broken up inside about this, not okay at all. He doesn't feel anything, as he reveals later on in the scene at the bonfire. So on the inside, he isn't actually feeling this way, but it's sort of his persona, or the mask he puts on, that he's very much pleased with himself and happy that his plan has gone through perfectly like this. The tension is super extreme in this scene through the cutting between their faces. Like, we don't see them directly looking at each other. It's a cut from Nero straight to Angelo's face, where he then turns to smirk at Nero, and we don't even see Nero's reaction to the smirk. It's literally just like Angelo just smirks, and that entire scene just brings ups up the tension to the viewer. It's like, oh, we're having this encounter. Nero off screen literally like knocks out the bodyguards, and Angelo's reaction isn't even to say anything. He's literally just staring out the window, ignoring what Nero did when he knocked out everyone, and it's like this deep ass silence, which produces extreme tension for the audience member, which is why I felt like there is a clear inherent specific tension developing between them that is very obvious and subtextually queer. Continuing on, in the next scene afterwards, where Nero literally holds a gun at Angelo's head, is another long, prolonged scene where they're staring into each other's eyes. And yes, there's like a gun at Angelo's head, but the fact that there's the heavy breathing that's going on Nero's case, he's just like gasping for air, and he's also holding the back of Angelo's neck. Is this necessary? No. But does Nero do it anyway? Yes, it is unnecessary because Angelo isn't even trying to move his face away. He literally like goads Nero into wanting to shoot him. Like, Angelo isn't trying to run away at all. He basically says like, do it. Like, he's pointing the gun straight at his forehead. So holding Angelo's neck is totally pointless. He doesn't have to hold his neck. Holding the back of someone's neck is a sexually loaded action in terms of a lot of times when a couple is kissing, you usually wrap your hands around the back of her neck. That's a common trope in so many romance film. You loop your arms around the back of someone's neck and kiss them, right? It's like the classic kissing silhouette. But in this case, it's like, obviously there's violent undertones in the fact that he's holding a gun to his head, but still there's a sexual element and subtext in terms of how he is like holding the back of Angelo's neck that he doesn't really need to hold at all, but he's still doing it anyways, and he's very close to Angelo's face. Even if it is an angry scene in which like Nero's super pissed off, he is still holding the back of Angelo's neck, which can be seen as subtextually sexual. And also, at a later time, in episode 12, Nero is awake at night, and he watches Angelo's vulnerable back as he sleeps. Angelo is expressing his humanity, his vulnerability, and slippage of composure, because all we get is a silent shot of Angelo's showing his back to Nero, which is basically being very vulnerable to Nero, and we're seeing it from Nero's perspective, because the next shot is a shot of Nero looking at Angelo, and he then looks up at the moon. So Nero is literally just like staring at Angelo while he's asleep. Also, the fact that he looks up at the moon afterwards and he's very like not saying anything, it gives it all romantic undertones. Staring at the stars or staring at the moon is inherently romantic, and the fact that he was looking at Angelo while he was sleeping, and Angelo was in a very vulnerable state, and Angelo basically allowed that. Angelo isn't staying up awake for once. He's like literally asleep after he is broken down in front of Nero. He started crying. He's probably dead ass tired, so it makes sense that he's like sleeping at this time. But Nero is the one who's keeping watch. He's the one who is staying awake, and he literally is just showing clear affection to Angelo in that he is thinking about what Angelo has revealed to him and staring at the moon as he does it. These are moments where Nero and Angelo share a lot of prolonged stares, or the last case where it's Nero staring for a long period at Angelo, who does not know he's staring at him. Either case, whether a person doesn't know about they're being stared at or if they're both staring at each other, it indicates a clear tension, a sexual tension, and a subtextual romantic undertone to the two people in the scene.
Pleasure's all mine.
In another life, I'd be making this trip with you and a trunk full of cash.
One might think this statement is proof of Nero's undoubted heterosexuality, but the fact that he mentions the romantic trope of escaping with a person you love and a trunk full of cash implies that Angelo is occupying that romantic partner position. Yes, he's saying he would prefer the waitress, but the fact that the show is acknowledging the whole running away together thing is a romantic trope itself brings more meaning to this trip, as well as the trip in the final episode where Nero and Angelo literally run away together, maybe not with a full trunk of cash, but with a bag full of pineapple cans, at least. In episode 4, there is the slightly romantic trope, I think, of the classic bickering couple trope, which I feel like is common in media for heterosexual couples, but doesn't really get talked about much when, in terms of like same-sex relationships, or it very much feels like an old married couple bickering. So in this case, in episode 4, Angelo bought only pineapple cans, and Nero is very much like, why did you do this? Like, seriously, pineapple cans, that's what you spend our money on? Like, it's like the classic dysfunctional duo trope, and I do love that in my ship, so I included this just because it felt like a romance trope to me, but to not everyone. I don't think this scene would be seen as a romance trope to everyone. It's just a tiny scene. In episode 6, they look out at the sunset together as they have a lighthearted conversation, and Angelo makes an actual joke. Angelo's being witty, and he makes a joking insult at Nero's expense. And this is along the time period where I feel like Angelo is becoming a lot closer to Nero after their whole little trip together where they defended one another, and he realized that Nero literally saved his life because Angelo nearly got killed when they were in that barn together. And Nero does the shot that saves Angelo from nearly getting like sliced to bits, and Angelo is very freaked out in that scene. So now Angelo knows that Nero can protect him, and now they're like a lot closer, and Angelo is making jokes with him. But by now, Angelo's a lot more trusting of Nero, and like you could see that he's getting along a lot better with Nero, and he's probably seeing how human, and Nero's no longer a villainous figure to him, he's become humanized to Angelo. And because of this, I feel like all of these times that they spend together, he's developed an affection for Nero, and it's shown in their joking scene together in this part, while they're talking while looking at a sunset, which is a romantic trope. And finally, in episode 9, Angelo gazes at the stars, and Nero also is looking up at the stars. They are looking up at stars together, but in different places. So they are maybe apart, but they are still together despite being apart. While sad violin music is playing, they're both staying at the same night sky together, which connects them. It's also connected to the fact that Nero is opened up to Angelo in the scene before this. He is told that he did not want to kill anyone that night, where the Venetti family went to go kill Angelo's family. Nero reveals that he was too scared to pull the trigger on anyone that night, so he didn't actually shoot anyone, and he failed to shoot Angelo when he ran away. And he reveals that he's always hated himself for that, and he felt like he was never enough for his father because of it. And he's basically very vulnerable with Angelo about how he never felt like enough for his father, or like man enough, very much talking about this hypermasculinity that he's trying to like perform for his father's sake, and also this extreme violence that is expected in the mafia that he did not clearly agree to at 14 years old. The fact that, you know, like his father put him up to this at 14 years old to kill kill people is greatly traumatizing. So Angelo is now understanding Nero's perspective, and he leaves in a rush and is very angry. He's very frustrated and angry, likely it is inferred from the audience, because he is having second thoughts on killing Nero, which is his intended mission. He swore to himself that he would get revenge for his family, but now he has affection and is starting to understand Nero's perspective, and he's just very frustrated that he's having this affection and feelings about Nero after hearing the truth of what happened that night from Nero's perspective. The fact that this stargazing scene occurs afterwards indicates that even though there could be tension and like hatred between them, but the two are still connected to one another. If they're looking at the same sky together, they still always go back to one another despite all of this hatred, all of the past that has happened to them. They are still very much connected and want to be together.
Avilio was his right-hand man.
You fool! Nero won't be able to kill him!
Hey, I need you to calm down.
He's been playing us for idiots. How many people have died because of you? How many more will it take to satisfy your bloodlust? Nero had a soft spot for you, said he wanted to give you a reason to live. That's the measure of his love and respect. And you drove the poor bastard insane!
The section revolves around episode 11, where Barbaro very much clearly states that Nero will be unable to kill Angelo when he discovers that Angelo is the traitor among them, and basically discovers Angelo's whole plot for revenge on the Don and everyone involved in his family's death. Now, the fact that Barbaro says this is odd because Nero was able to kill his younger brother, but Barbaro can't imagine Nero killing Angelo. Why? The only reason can be because he realizes or suspects Nero's love for Angelo, as in romantic love. It's clear that Nero has some sort of love and affection for Angelo. Why else would he be unable to kill Angelo unless he had a romantic attraction and affection towards him? He also says Nero had a soft spot for you in the English dub, which to me also indicates that Nero is enamored and caught up in Angelo, and that he's developed an affection for him so much that he cannot actively like hurt Angelo or do anything terrible to Angelo, which also is proven by the fact in the final trip that they have together, he also shows multiple moments that he has a soft spot. He proves the truth to Barbaro's statement that he has a soft spot for Angelo. Many instances, he offers him cigarettes, even though he's supposed to be pissed by the fact that Angelo basically caused his entire family's death, all of his friends' deaths. He should greatly hate Angelo. He still gives him cigarettes. He still shows Angelo empathy. He listens to Angelo's statement without question that they're gonna go to the beach. He's letting Angelo lead him to a specific place. That could have been a setup, but he doesn't care. He's gonna listen to Angelo. Also, he cuts off the rope around his hands. He lets him be free and literally lets him eat some of the food that he was eating himself, I believe, because he probably only ordered for himself and just lets Angelo eat it. So, you know what I mean? He has a soft spot for Angelo, and Barbaro has clearly seen it. He is indicating it by implying that Nero will never be able to kill Angelo. And if that is true, that also could be possible proof that at the end of the show, Nero doesn't actually kill Angelo. It is an open ending. As I mentioned in my open ending essay video, that is one of the possible endings where Nero is unable to kill Angelo because of his affection and the fact that he has empathy and he is not going to resort to the violence that they have kept resorting to throughout the series. This entire statement to me proves there is an inherently subtextual romantic relationship between Nero and Angelo that is basically implied and unsaid in the fact that he is unable to kill Angelo, which is odd considering Nero has been able to do many atrocious, violent things over the course of his life. He's completely certain of his statement that he will not be able to kill Angelo. And I believe Barbaro's statement that Nero will be unable to kill Angelo because Barbaro has known Nero for years. So I feel like this is a very true statement. Also, this is further implied by the fact Angelo sort of like talks back and does of course, classically, he does a witty remark to Barbaro to provoke him even further.
And the jealousy ate you up, didn't it?
Saying that like, oh, you're totally jealous of our relationship, which is even further implying that there is like a romantic relationship between Nero and Angelo, and Angelo is blatantly mentioning that Barbaro is jealous of the fact that he wasn't included. He was now third wheeling or isn't as important to Nero anymore, that Angelo basically became Nero's right-hand man instead of Barbara, who has probably been here way longer and has been supporting him for way longer. So that probably stings a lot more for Barbara. He wasn't the one chosen to be closest to Nero, or the one that Nero cared about the most and had a lot of affection for. It was Angelo that he had all this affection for, and he had a clear soft spot for. And Nero, who always believed Angelo's perspective and always put his opinion first, or in terms of like coming up with plans and what to do, he always trusted Angelo. This entire scene implies romantic subtext between Nero and Angelo. The story has the subtext of romantic attraction, particularly because the trope of the show itself is similar to spy romance plots. You may be wondering, what the hell are you talking about, spy romance plot? I'm talking about the trope where a person's mission is to take out a person or get rid of them, and that whole mission becomes complicated because of the main protagonist becoming attached or in love with their target or mission. This is a very well-known romance trope from what I'm aware of. The whole I'm not supposed to like you, but now that I've gotten to know you, I do like you. The real you is a whole ass trope, probably in many novels, movies, and fanfics. Basically the classic we weren't meant to fall in love, but we did trope. Like, that is what the show, at least for me, that was the subtextual romantic trope that it was falling into, especially when they were running away together. Even the first time when they were escaping the people that were trying to kill them and trying to lie low, and then an assassin was going after them, it very much felt like, oh, we're stuck together. Angelo's like, I'm trying to kill you, and now there's an assassin going after you, and I'm helping you still stay alive instead of like trying to actually kill you, because he could easily have let the assassin kill Nero, but he didn't because he wanted to get closer to Dawn. But there was even more moments where he didn't really need that in anymore. He was already fairly close to the Dawn. He could have still let Nero get killed when someone tried to attack them on the streets, because he was already fairly close. He was already in the family, I believe, and yet he still protected Nero in that moment. He instinctively called his name to warn him of the shot. Because of those tropes of like, oh, I've started to like you and have now affection for you even though I'm supposed to be killing you, that is a whole last trope in many different, like, whether it's spy films, an assassin like book, like a book where like an assassin falls in love for a target, like that feels like a very common trope. Because this is a very obvious trope that exists in our media and is very common in the media we consume, when the last episode hits and Angelo reveals he didn't want to kill Nero, it subtextually reads as, I can't kill you now because I care about you, I've gotten to know you, and implied is Angelo has feelings for Nero. So by confessing that he cannot kill Nero indicates to the viewer, who is seeing all these subtextually queer moments between Nero and Angelo, that Angelo is confirming his affection for Nero, that he loves him, that he had an affection for him, that feelings have developed over the course of this show, so that he literally just cannot finish what he has sworn to do for his family. He cannot complete that whole mission. He cannot kill Nero because he has affection for him that he probably hasn't felt in a long time, ever since the loss of his family. He clearly didn't have a purpose. He was just wandering aimlessly. He was acting as a pickpocketer. He didn't really have a purpose, and after throwing himself into this whole plot of revenge, he has literally found what he probably thought he has lost, which was unconditional love for a person. Regardless of what Angelo's sexuality is, we don't know if he's like gay. I mean, he could be bi, he could be asexual, we don't know. Whether or not it's like a sexual romantic attraction or a non-sexual romantic attraction, there is still a clear attraction between them that is evident in these romantic tropes and the implied subtextual framing of a relationship throughout the series. Now, you might be thinking, why is this relevant? Why make an entire video breaking down Nero and Angelo's relationship? As I mentioned in my other 91 Days video, the show has stuck with me so that once in a while I'll suddenly remember it again and want to rewatch it. The open ending of the show is masterful and so bittersweet, but the show is not only great for its handling of open ending, but it's also great for the complex development between these two characters that felt authentic and natural. The show has a satisfying open ending, as well a subtextual romantic relationship that slowly captures your attention throughout. And I think that is beautiful. To not acknowledge the subtext would be a disservice to their relationship and what the show essentially represents. A tale of two men who, despite animosity, cannot quite easily break apart and linger together until the last moments of the show. A relationship like that is filled with affection as well as complicated feelings of guilt and hatred. And I don't know about you, but I enjoy shows with relationships that I can pick apart and analyze. It makes the experience of watching the show that much more exciting the second time around.